Welcome to Be Provided Conservation Radio, sharing stories and information about the environment, wildlife, and the people who are dedicating their lives to protect the world for future generations. These inspirational stories will take you from the Santa Cruz Mountains to remote areas of Africa.
Hello, everyone. This is Marcia Civic of Be Provided Conservation Radio. I am honored to have Dr. Liz Tyson as our guest today. Liz is an animal advocate with over 16 years of experience working for animal protection and conservation. She is currently the programs director for Born Free USA, where she is responsible for running the largest primate, or one of the largest, primate sanctuaries in the USA, as well as leading the organization's campaign program. She joined Born Free USA in 2018 and has worked as a freelance consultant for the organization's linked charity, Born Free Foundation, in her native United Kingdom for some years prior to taking up this current role. So, Liz, it sounds like you have been everywhere. You've been to, you've covered a lot of ground. You've been in the UK, Ireland, Colombia, Spain, Middle East, Bolivia, Ethiopia, and Peru. And that's amazing. And you've been, doing amazing things from anywhere from running sterilization programs for street dogs in the Middle East and working with indigenous communities in the Colombian Amazon to bring the end to hunting of wild primates. So that is amazing. So
thank you.
I'm just so honored to have you here today, Liz, and welcome to our show today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've been very lucky to have lots of weird and wonderful and exciting experiences, definitely.
That's wonderful. It keeps you busy for sure.
It does. It does. It keeps me out of trouble.
Yep. So today we're going to primarily talk about the primate sanctuary that you are the programs director for. But before we get started, I just wanted to ask you, I hope you and your loved ones are staying healthy during this pandemic. And I believe you are in Texas right now. So I was just wondering how things are with you right now in Texas.
I thankfully everybody here and staff and monkeys alike are doing fine. We're kind of we're in a little bubble here, really. We're in a very rural area. We've been in kind of stricter lockdown than the rest of the state. Texas is one of the states that's kind of opening up perhaps more quickly than some of the others. But fun fact, or not so fun fact, that the monkeys can actually contract COVID, the species of monkeys that we care for. So we've had to implement some pretty strict measures for staff. So we're all actually we live kind of communally in different places on site, but we're working from home in those communal areas right now. We're also all wearing masks and gloves, and so it's unusual, but thankfully we are all safe and well down here, which is great.
That is great. Well, I'm happy to hear that. And that was one of my questions, and we can touch on it now. I was curious if it was a risk for the monkeys to contract COVID-19. And have they reacted to you guys being in masks and gloves and working with them? Do they notice a difference?
Probably not, because we do have some pretty strict protocols anyway. We work with macaques, and they are natural carriers of herpes B. So zoonotic diseases are kind of a reality that we have to manage every day here. So that's something. Wearing gloves, we don't have any direct interaction with the monkeys, partly for that, but partly to kind of encourage them to be monkeys. We don't want them focusing on us. We want them focusing on one another. So wearing gloves and things like that, certainly that is something that we always do for safety. The masks are a new thing, and I think some of them do react. It's odd because they, like humans, read facial expressions. So when our faces are covered, I think initially they were kind of a little bit freaked out and didn't really know what was going on, but they very quickly adapt. As soon as they realize something isn't a threat, then they're okay, and they realize it's their usual caregivers underneath the masks. They're fine.
Oh, that's great. I've had a hard time with adjusting to not seeing expressions as well with masks. So
absolutely. It's very odd having group meetings where we're all kind of, if we're in an inside space and we all have to be wearing masks, then just not being able to read colleagues' expressions and things like that. So, and you find yourself smiling behind the mask and trying to make your eyes smile particularly hard so people can see it.
Exactly. That's great. I'm interested in your story. How did you get involved in this line of work? I mean, you've been already 16 years into this, it sounds like. What inspired you to get involved?
Do you know, the reason I got involved was kind of sheer luck with Primate specifically. I think I was working an office job. I was a training manager for a corporate PR company in London back in 2003, 2004, which couldn't be further from where I am now, both geographically and in terms of the actual work. But I think it just decided at my early 20s, realized that this wasn't what I wanted to be doing for the rest of my life. And the corporate world certainly wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. So the one thing that had been a constant throughout my whole life since I was a child was my love of animals. And so I thought, well, now's the time, if I'm going to get into an actual career working with animals and really doing something I love, then that was the time to do it. So it was a very kind of scattergun approach. I just found any job that was being advertised with animals and applied for everything. And as luck would have it, weirdly enough, Monkey Sanctuary, based on the south coast of England, Wild Futures Monkey Sanctuary, which is an incredible place, and they saw something in me despite me not having experience working with primates, and I got a job as a caregiver there, caretaker and education officer. And that was kind of where it started. So I left London, moved to this place by the sea in this kind of beautiful old kind of slightly falling down house where everybody lived together and we all worked together. It was a culture shock, but that was kind of the beginning. And then from there, I've stayed within the not-for-profit sector, specifically animals and conservation since then, and ended up this job, again, I was working as a consultant for Born Free Foundation, which is our kind of sibling organization in the UK. Mm-hmm. And my colleague knew that I was keen to get back into kind of more hands-on sanctuary work. And as this role came up, again, it was just, I feel very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. He suggested I apply for it and I got it. So I now have my dream job, which is amazing.
I love it. It's nice when life works out that way, for sure.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And I want to, I mentioned that or I didn't mention, but I was going to mention that you have a doctorate in animal law as well. So I think that'll be interesting to hear how this applies to your work that you're doing now as well. Absolutely. So, and what a transition. So I was curious, what is Born Free USA? I know the Primate Sanctuary is part of Born Free USA, and I don't know if you want to touch on the whole foundation, but can you give us a scope of what they do besides that?
Of course. So Born Free USA grew out of the work of the Born Free Foundation in the UK, which was if people have heard of the film Born Free, it's no coincidence the two are linked. Born Free Foundation was founded in the mid-'80s by the two actors in that film, Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, mm-hmm. and their son, Will Travers, who remains the president of the global operation of Born Free. And they founded Born Free off the back of the death of an elephant who they'd starred with in a film and who was then moved to London Zoo, where she died a very, very premature death at 16 years old. An elephant should live, until their 60s and 70s. And it was the death of that elephant, Poly, that kind of triggered Virginia, Bill, and Will wanting to start what was then called Zoo Check and then evolved into Born Free. So basically the mission of the organizations, Born Free USA came later in 2002 when the work of Born Free Foundation was sort of expanded onto the other side of the Atlantic. And we're a separate organization to the Born Free Foundation, but we share the same mission. And I think fundamentally our work is very much focused on keeping wildlife in the wild. We want animals to be born free, we want them to live free, and that's the real focus of our work. So whether that is covering animals in captivity more generally, talking about zoos, talking about circuses, the use of animals in entertainment, hunting, trapping, strengthening legislation like the Endangered Species Act, and then working in conservation projects in the field. So those are kind of all of our core areas of work, but it all comes back to this principle that we really believe that wild animals should be able to live their lives free in their natural habitat.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And Born Free actually was the movie that actually inspired me to love animals and want to go to Africa. It was such a...
That's wonderful.
It was such a big part of my life.
My trigger point, you say, what was it that inspired me? And one of the things, weirdly enough, and I'm lucky enough to know Virginia now. Sadly, Bill passed away a number of years ago. I never got to meet him. But the film that they filmed, Ring of Bright Water, which is about the otters, that, oh my goodness, I was obsessed with that film when I was a child. And so that was a big inspiration for me. So it's funny that I've, just this last year, I got to sit with Virginia in my own living room and talk to her about Ring of Bright Water. It was wonderful. I think art and literature and cinema can be very powerful in these things.
I think so too. I would be totally starstruck with her in the same room with me. I wouldn't know what to say. She's
just as wonderful as you expect her to be.
Oh, wonderful. That is great. How did the Primate Sanctuary end up in Texas? Why that location in the U.S. or in the U.S. at all, I guess? How was it created?
It's a good question. It's an interesting story. There was a troop of monkeys in Japan, Japanese macaques, near the city of Kyoto. And over the years, my understanding is the local people kind of provisioned the troop, and they were quite famous. There was sort of behavioral research done around them, and people were very interested in this troop of monkeys. Being provisioned by the local community meant that, the population of monkeys was growing exponentially. And eventually the troop got so large that it kind of split into two. Part of the troop moved away from human settlement, and the other part of the troop moved towards human settlement, which then resulted in human-wildlife conflict. And these monkeys, who were kind of beloved to some, then became considered a pest to others because they were kind of actively interfering with day-to-day life. So the authorities were threatening to kill them, this troop of monkeys, and an anthropologist from the US caught wind of this, and the anthropologist had been working in that area, and long story short, arranged for the monkeys to be rescued from Japan and brought to a ranch in Texas. So initially, the ranch was based in Ensenada, which is closer to the border than we are now, close to the Mexican border, and then moved a little bit further inland into the country near Dili, and then moved finally to where we are now, which is kind of in between a small town called Dili and a small town called Cotulla in South Texas. So that's how we ended up here, 150 monkeys. And so from that point on, kind of moving the site, even though in many ways where we are isn't ideal for a monkey sanctuary, the monkeys have adapted very, very well. And now the kind of operation of moving them, we look after 467 individuals right now. So wow. We are where we are and we're staying.
That's terrific. You started with this troop of 150, correct? Of macaques?
Yes,
okay.
Right. Yes.
And
these macaques.
Wow. So what can you describe a little bit of what they look like? Are they big, small?
I think people will probably have a good mental image of them because there's a lot of really beautiful photos of them. They are the monkeys who, if you've seen the photographs of them, the white-haired monkeys with very pink faces, sitting in hot springs, and they're kind of generally huddled together. They're probably the size of adult males, the size of a large dog, and they're big, strong guys as monkeys go. Very fluffy, very furry, as you can imagine. Their natural habitat would often be very, very cold, with these beautiful pink faces.
Oh, I've seen pictures of them sitting in the hot springs. That's very popular. They're really cute. Do they habituate fairly easy to humans?
The guys we have now, most of the Japanese macaques are now descended from that original troop. For a long time, the place was run as an observatory, so researchers would come and learn about the monkeys. And then gradually over the time, it changed hands. It went to kind of an animal welfare organization, who we then merged with in 2008. So it moved from being an observatory to a sanctuary, and we put controls on breeding and things like that. But the majority of the Japanese macaques we have here now are descended from that original troop. So they've grown up around people. To be perfectly honest, they're pretty uninterested in us. They know that we provide them with their food, but other than that, they're pretty chilled out around us. I mean, some of the rescue monkeys who we've brought in since then have come from more traumatic backgrounds and struggle with relating to humans, and we have to be very careful around them for our safety and their safety. But the Japanese macaques are pretty chill guys, to be honest.
Well, that answered a question I had too. So they must breed fairly okay in captivity, if I can say it correctly. And this brings a question: who else resides in the sanctuary, and how many different species do you have there?
Sure. As I say, when we took over, one of the things, I think the thing that differentiates perhaps a sanctuary from a zoo is that we don't want to breed more animals for a life in captivity, knowing that we're not going to be able to release them. So we implemented, and it took some time to get it under control, we implemented some strict non-breeding policies. So we effectively castrate the boys, and so we're no longer having babies. But yes, they absolutely did breed in captivity, which is why we have a large population now. But we're probably just under half of the animals we have now are direct rescues who we have taken on. We care for 16 species, so 10 species of macaque and 6 species of baboon, and then we also have a small group of vervets.
Oh, and they're tiny, right?
I mean, in comparison to the other guys we have, the vervets are very small, very mischievous, and they're beautiful monkeys. And the little monkeys with very, very black faces and this wonderful kind of wispy kind of white and black long tails.
Can you tell us a little bit some of the stories where these monkeys come from? And I believe you just rescued 5, correct?
We did. Our monkeys come from, some of them will come from the pet trade. Sometimes owners will realize, usually very quickly when you take on a monkey, they're very sweet and helpless when they're babies, but they are wild animals. They are dangerous. It doesn't matter if they're the smaller species or the big guys that we care for. They can do a human a lot of damage. And that's what we find is people take them on as pets. They hit adolescence. They start challenging their owners, as it were, for their place in their hierarchy, because, it's non-human primates live in these very kind of hierarchical structures, and they need to know where they sit in that hierarchy, and they find that out in a normal troop, often by challenging some of the more vulnerable members. And it doesn't matter to them if you're a human or you're another monkey. That's what tends to happen. They hit adolescence and effectively they start attacking the humans around them. And that's when they will either be relinquished or confiscated, and then they may come to us. We also have animals come to us from laboratories and from roadside zoos, which was where the 5 who've just joined us have come from. So we have Marlin, Violet, and Presley, who are 3 baboons. And then we also have Mrs. Wilkin, who's become quite famous because she's wonderful and her fame is well deserved. And Anna, who are 2 macaques. Mrs. Wilkin is we think she's a Japanese rhesus macaque hybrid, and Anna is a very beautiful young rhesus macaque.
Oh, okay.
But Mrs. Wilkin she's such a character. She's in her late 20s, which is very old for a macaque anyway. The reason I say we think she's a Japanese rhesus macaque hybrid is because she has suffered from such health issues. Every long bone in her body is deformed. Her jaw is deformed. We think that's more from an old break that wasn't allowed to heal properly or wasn't treated properly. She has arthritis. She's a hot mess, but when we first heard about her, to be perfectly honest, we were so worried about her, and we were actually worried from, on paper, her health issues. Would she even make the journey? Would she adapt? Would she survive very long? Oh my goodness, she showed up, and we were expecting the young rhesus, Anna, who's really fit and healthy, about 14 years old. We thought she would be the dominant one, but no, Mrs. Wilkin was in her transfer cage. She was hungry, and she let us know she was hungry. As soon as she saw her food, I think we were dithering too much, and we didn't immediately hand it to her, so she threw her water at us in disgust. And she's just wonderful. You walk past her enclosure now, and she kind of comes stomping along with her not quite correct gait, because she's got all of these bone problems, and she'll come and she'll look, have you got anything for me? And if you don't have anything for her, then she gives you this kind of very angry, Paddington does his very hard stare. Mrs. Wilkin has a similar kind of thing, but she's just wonderful, and she's just such a reminder that it doesn't really matter what kind of traumatic past they come from, there's just always this chance that they can have this second chance at life, and they'll make the most of it. It's just wonderful to see her after all these years. The place they were confiscated from was absolutely horrible. There were 400 animals taken from there.
This was the Roadside Zoo? I'm sorry to interrupt, so this was the recent Roadside Zoo that you... Yeah. Wow. Okay. There were 400 animals. I did not know that.
There were. So ALDF, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, did an incredible job of it. And this was years of challenging this place. The place was licensed, and despite the various infringements of the Animal Welfare Act. And ALDF really, really pushed to get this place closed down. And eventually they did. And they took on the incredible mission of then dealing with the 400 animals. So, that we took 5 of them, but ALDF were dealing with the logistics of working out what to do with everyone and where to find forever homes, and they actually funded the construction of a new enclosure for the 3 baboons for us because we didn't have anywhere to put them. So they did an incredible job at getting the animals confiscated and rescuing them and getting them to a safe place. I really admire them for the work they did there.
That's great. And that's where, when I read that, that's where I thought that your animal law degree is probably very helpful in getting through some of this stuff. The conditions in these zoos, these roadside zoos, I'm sure you find they're not always good. And they're actually legal, right? It's legal to have these roadside zoos? That was the subject of my doctoral thesis, is that something that's astounding, and this is kind of globally. My research was focused on UK zoos, but what we find is these places hold licenses. They will be repeatedly licensed, and despite horrendous conditions. So this is, Cricket Hollow, where the 5 monkeys we're talking about came from, there was evidence of there was no veterinary care being provided. The court heard that there were the corpses of animals who passed away just left to rot in the enclosures. We had, so Presley and Violet, the 2 female baboons we rescued, we think are the daughters of Marlin, the male baboon. We also heard that there was another young baboon who had been deliberately removed from his mother against vet's advice as a baby to act as a quote-unquote ambassador. And from the accounts that we heard from the court testimony, that little monkey used to demonstrate this stereotypic behavior, so this kind of repetitive, obsessive, compulsive behavior, which is triggered by stress and is common in captive animals in stressful situations. And he would hit his head against the wall repeatedly. Now, he eventually passed away at I think he was 4 years old. He was, he passed away as a baby. He could, he should be living into his 30s. And the zoo claimed that he died from meningitis. But again, the court testimony said that they never actually had him tested for that. And the likelihood is what he actually died from was swelling of the brain caused by this horrific, repetitive behavior. That's so sad.
It's horrendous. And this place was licensed. This place had a license to operate.
That's just crazy. And there's probably a lot of places around that are like that, I would assume. That's really scary. And do you think, I don't know, this is just a side question, but, Tiger King during this whole shelter in place I couldn't bring myself to watch it, but seemed very horrendous and a hot mess to me. Do you think that is bringing light to some of these type of roadside zoos and, entertainment for animals? Do you think it's helping in a way to educate people that this isn't right?
I think the docuseries itself probably didn't. I think it was actually pretty irresponsible the way that it was portrayed, because I think they did a job of making the proprietor of the tiger establishment this kind of almost heroic, despite it was so problematic. It wasn't just animal abuse, it was misogyny, and it was all sorts of issues and partner abuse and things like that, which were just there. They were right there on the screen, and yet he was somehow sort of played as this kind of slightly quirky, just this wacky guy who had this unusual life. So I think the way that was portrayed was very irresponsible. And I think they also conflated the idea of roadside zoos and sanctuaries. Like there was kind of this element of, same, they both keep animals captive and this. So I think the docuseries itself was irresponsible and hasn't had a positive impact. But I think the discussion that came from it has been very, very useful, because I've seen some really amazing discussion come out of that, where organizations who really do know what they're talking about and now really kind of setting the record straight. So there's been some really great stuff come out of that, and I think it started a conversation. I wish they'd have used their opportunity to really talk about the issues with these tiger breeding facilities with this cub petting, with all of those things which are horribly cruel practices to animals. And instead they went down the route of this, this wacky story about this unusual man. So I think that the docuseries itself was a missed opportunity, but I think some of the stuff that's come out of it has been very important.
Oh, good. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I don't know if did you watch the whole thing? Did you watch?
I did.
Oh, you did? You made it?
Yeah, I made it through. And I feel, and I also feel we were talking amongst colleagues, we kind of felt it was almost our responsibility, because obviously big cats in captivity, the legislation that is trying to be passed to restrict that kind of ownership, that's a big part of our work. And so I felt that we were going to get asked about it. We knew that it was going to be something that came up. So we felt that we almost had an obligation to watch it. So it was difficult to watch, but I sat through the whole thing.
Good for you. That makes sense, though. I understand.
Yeah.
I haven't. But anyways, getting back to, some of the, I wanted to ask while we were talking about the recovery, or, when some of these primates come to you after being rescued, how they're so intelligent, and, they probably come in a very distressed mental state. How long, or can they actually recover? It sounds like they do somewhat from what you were saying, but does it take a lot?
It depends on the individual, and it depends on their background. I think that's one thing that we're always very careful to talk about. I think as a sanctuary, there's something so precious about, I just talked about Mrs. Wilkin. There's something so precious and special about being able to offer a second chance to an animal who's come from a traumatic background. But I think we need to be really careful about kind of seeing the moment they arrive at the sanctuary as being this kind of fairy tale moment where life turns around for them. Yeah. It certainly gets better, but the trauma that they carry can stay with them for life. And, we have a really sad example of a young Japanese macaque called Charlie, who was one of the monkeys kept as a pet, and who bit the grandson of the owner, and he was confiscated. He was going to be killed. He was a healthy young monkey. He was beautiful. He was persistently, chronically stressed by being in captivity. We could not socialize him with another monkey. He didn't cope. He would become violent towards them. He was aggressive. He kind of ricocheted between incredibly aggressive and incredibly scared. And he actually passed away at 7 years old. And the histopathology came back, and literally the cause of death was chronic stress. And it's not, it's a sad story, and we want to tell the happy stories, and we do we have hundreds of other monkeys who have come and they've thrived. But I think it's important to talk about the stories like Charlie's, because even monkeys who get a second chance can't always recover. So what we really need to be doing is stopping the pet trade, and stopping the trade in roadside zoos, and stopping these animals being born into these traumatic circumstances in the first place, because we can only take in so many, and sometimes the damage done is so profound that they can't recover. So that for every, we do have a lot of happy ending stories, but I'm always keen to make sure we don't present our work as something which is this immediate happy ending. It's something that can take years or decades even, and sometimes for some it's just kind of too late.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, first I want to ask, who is on your team? You said that you're all kind of living there communally right now, and who is helping care for all these animals right now?
Sure. We have, we're the largest primate sanctuary in the US. So as I said, we've got 467 monkeys right now. We have a team of 12. So we have a very small team relative to the amount of animals we have. But our team is incredible, absolutely incredible. They are so dedicated and so hardworking, and know these animals so well, and care about these animals so deeply. Everything they need, they get. And, all of our team go the extra mile. We have a full-time vet who's wonderful, Dr. Johnson. We're very lucky. There are not that many sanctuaries that have full-time vets, and often they have to outsource the vet work. So we're very lucky that we have a vet. She's been here 5 years. So again, she knows the individuals, and it means we can provide that extra level of care. And we have plans to expand our team in the coming years, but we have an incredible team here.
That sounds like it. And are they mostly volunteers, or are they, I know you have the vet, are they mostly, if people wanted to come work with you or learn how to do this, do they have to be biologists? Can they volunteer?
The 12 people are paid staff, and we think that's, and I appreciate there are some places who for budget purposes can't necessarily have a paid staff. I think for us it's a really important part of our work, because we need people who are going to stick around, because people with longer term experience who know the individual animals is always going to be the best for them. So we try to make sure we look after our staff so that we can also do a great job of looking after the monkeys. In terms of volunteering, then we are hoping to establish a kind of more formal volunteer program. At present, our location actually makes that relatively difficult. To be able to host volunteers, we really would need to be able to provide accommodation, because we really are in the middle of nowhere here. So that's part of our plan for the next 2 or 3 years, is to construct the physical accommodation we would need to have volunteers, and to expand our team to include sort of a very structured volunteer program, and also an internship program, so that we can kind of share our expertise and help to kind of do information exchanges and things like that, so people can come and also learn at the sanctuary.
That's great. I was going to ask, is there any type of education that you do with the community, either at the sanctuary or around the U.S. in any way, about talking about how we need to stop, this pet trade and roadside zoo and such?
I mean, as an organization, we do kind of campaigning and advocacy around those things. So it's interesting, because we're one of the organizations, I guess, that kind of delivers the whole thing from, we campaign on the issues, and then we also look after the victims of the trades that we are challenging. So, we're not just campaigning to close down roadside zoos, but we're also taking in animals who have suffered in those places. So it gives us perhaps a kind of somewhat unique perspective to be able to talk about the individual stories. When we talk about roadside zoos, we see the impact of what these places have, because we're literally looking after victims of this trade. And we do our kind of advocacy work and our campaign work is across the country, both in kind of situations like this, where you very kindly invited us to talk about our work, but we also work with the media, we work with our supporters directly. And in terms of the sanctuary's educational work, we kind of want to develop more educational work specifically around the sanctuary, but we always want to balance. We don't ever want to open to the public, because the monkeys would find that very stressful. We don't want to exhibit animals. So we need to walk that fine line of ensuring that we tell their stories, but we don't impact on their welfare while doing so.
That makes sense. And so that was a question I also had too, that, how can people learn more and help out? I know that you have an adoption program, correct, for monkeys?
Yes, we do. So we have kind of this virtual adoption program. I think there's 17 of our guys on there, and they're all, they're all of there. If you go on our website, you can have a look and you can go through and see what kind of people often adopt someone because they might have a similar personality to them. So we've got guys who are a bit shy and who are feisty and who, larger than life, and, a great friend to the other monkeys in their enclosure. So we've got information about some of the guys you can adopt, and it's really sweet, and some of the stories are funny, but ultimately that kind of thing really does help, because we don't open to the public, we don't have commercial funding, and we do rely on the generosity of our donors to be able to keep operating and keep providing homes for these guys. So if anybody is interested in adopting, then it's a wonderful thing you can do for the sanctuary, but it also means that you then create a relationship with the sanctuary, because you then get updated on what's going on, you learn about how your monkey's doing and things like that. It's a very sweet program, so people can just head to our website and learn a little bit more about that.
Terrific. And I will post your website as well in the show notes, so people have that. But you're looking at, you talked about expanding for housing, for possible volunteering. Are you thinking, is there enough land to actually expand, like the land that the primates are on, that the monkeys are on?
We have a very kind of detailed 5-year plan for the sanctuary. I think one of our kind of most interesting challenges, if you like, is that a lot of our population is now fairly elderly. So we operate off 175 acres. So one thing we have is space. But what's kind of interesting is we're looking at how we manage the monkeys as they do reach their old age, because just like people, they need more oversight and more care, and potentially they develop ailments which might need treatment. So we have at the moment a 56-acre enclosure, which is just incredible for, if you consider, you know, animals in captivity, but having 56 acres to just roam free on, you know, and there's 200 monkeys who live in that space. And we're working out how, if we need to change that dynamic and if we need to change the setup of that so that as these monkeys get older, that space doesn't become a hindrance for them. So we've got kind of a plan to redevelop some of the enclosures to better provide for them as they reach the kind of later stages. And over time, that will mean, as monkeys pass away, it will mean that other spaces free up. So we've got lots and lots of enclosure space, and we've got very kind of clear plans in the direction that we want to go. We do have a couple of our older enclosures that we would like to replace in the coming years, and that's something that we're fundraising for. But then once we've done that, what we really do have, we've got a lot of space for our guys.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I also wanted to know a monkey question here, kind of sidetrack. Are all monkeys social? Do they like being in a larger community, like with other monkeys, or is there a kind that's more solitary than the other? Do you know?
It really depends on the species. As a general rule, yes, they are sociable. All non-human primates are sociable to some extent, but certainly some of the New World primates, and so like marmosets and tamarins, will often just live in pairs or very small groups. Our guys can live in huge troops. You know, troops of dozens and dozens of monkeys. So the size of the troop they would live in would generally depend on the species and the obviously kind of environmental factors like land fragmentation and how, you know, access to resources and things like that. But as a general rule, yes, absolutely. All primates, including humans, are social species. So probably one of the most important things for a monkey is another monkey.
That makes sense. I was just curious. Do you have a favorite? A favorite story or monkey? I know you mentioned, is it Mrs. Wilkin? Or
yes, Mrs. Wilkin's wonderful. Yeah. My favorite. We're not really supposed to have favorites, but obviously everyone does. My favorite is Gizmo, and he's a long-tailed macaque. I think he was one of the first monkeys I kind of laid eyes on when I first came to the sanctuary. And he's just glorious. There's nothing particularly special about him, but I just really love him. His teeth are kind of slightly too big for his mouth, and his ears are slightly too big for his head. And he's just wonderful. He's just got the most wonderful face. But the funny thing is about Gizmo, he does not care for me at all. He has literally no interest in me. It's not that I have this amazing bond with him or anything like that. I just adore him, and he's just completely indifferent to me.
That's always a challenge with relationships. You're always attracted to the one that doesn't really pay attention to you. Why was he named Gizmo? Is there any reason?
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not sure if he arrived before my time. I'm not sure if he arrived with that name or we renamed him, which sometimes happens. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure.
I was going to ask, most are named when they come in, I would assume, from different things. Yeah.
And we generally keep their names unless we already have someone with that name. Then we may change the name. And there's also been times before where we've signed confidentiality agreements and things like that. So we just change the name just in case the name ever comes up in any kind of public discourse, so that we're not using a name that would then link that animal to their past, if you like. So but generally they keep the names they come with. And then obviously over the years, because the original troop were breeding, then a lot of them have been named by our own staff over the decades.
Interesting. I also wanted to ask, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I apologize. Okay. But back to figuring out how can we find out how to affect like the law around roadside zoos or the pet trade? How can who do we contact, or how do we find out more information about this? Is that a fair question?
Absolutely. What I would recommend to learn a little bit more about that, we're actually in the process. There's a hearing for the Captive Primate Safety Act, which is a bill that we've been working on, which would incorporate restrictions of interstate trade in non-human primates into the Lacey Act. So effectively, it would be a ban on being able to trade monkeys across state borders. There's a hearing for that on the 24th of June. What we tend to do is we have an e-alert system for anybody interested in that kind of side of our work can sign up for our e-alerts, which you can do via our website, and then you will be updated, if something's going on in your particular area. So there was something in one of the counties in North Carolina a couple of days ago were voting on something to do with restricting keeping capuchin monkeys as pets. And so we sent an e-alert out to our supporters in that area. So that's really the best way of keeping on top of anything relating to the issues we work on. Then we send out those reminders and those alerts so people can get involved and take specific steps to help support or oppose legislation, depending on whether it's good or bad for animals.
Good. So I will make sure I post that information as well.
Thank you.
And so your website is bornfreeusa.org?
That's it.
Okay. Great. And just in case listeners don't get a chance to see the show notes, but if you go to bornfreeusa.org, you can find out more information. So interesting. I was just, reading about doing the research for this. I was just, it's kind of a world that I really wasn't made aware of until recently, I guess. So I'm glad that you're there for the monkeys and giving them a second life after all they've been through. And I was just, if I was just going to ask, unless you have other things to say, but I always ask people what gives them hope.
What gives me hope? Do you know what? I think at the moment there is so much there's kind of awareness being raised around so many different things. Obviously there's been, which is kind of off topic, but if you look at everything that's going on at the moment, the discussion around race, in not just in the US, but globally, I think that gives me hope, not just hoping that it will move the discussion positively forward around race and discrimination of humans, but I think the intersections between those things, we're talking about systems of oppression, and we're really thinking, I think, critically about it right now. So I think that really opens up people to think more about different systems of oppression and how kind of people power can change things, and how, people really, really wanting to make a difference. So I think this kind of feeling, even though obviously it's been triggered by such terrible events, then this kind of hope of people feeling they can make a difference, I think, is something that gives me hope right now.
Me too. I agree. This has given us all an opportunity to kind of organize our priorities as well, and fight for what we believe in. So, well, thank you, Liz, for everything you do at the Primate Sanctuary, and we'll help get the word out on the work that you're doing, and hopefully people can get involved with some of this legislation and stopping some of these actions that absolutely. So
we can make those changes. I think that's what we're learning right now. When we come together and we kind of speak with a united voice and all of that, we can change things. So
exactly. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio. Links and resources to today's topic are in our show notes on iTunes. We appreciate your dedication and interest in protecting our natural world for future generations. If you like what you heard, please get involved by volunteering, donating, and sharing these podcasts with your friends. It also helps us to inform more people if you take a minute to leave a rating or review on iTunes. Have a great day, and thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio.